It started with a bang, a SWAT team kicking down the wrong door. What followed was a fight for justice that exposed a system willing to sacrifice innocent lives. Theron Duval heard it before, the sharp crack of wood splintering under force. But never here. Not in his own apartment in Tucson, Arizona. The sound was sudden, violent, and it shattered the calm of the evening like a thunderclap. Before he could react, a blue arc of electricity flashed through the air. Lyndon gasped sharply, her body jerking as the taser hit her. She collapsed to the floor, trembling uncontrollably. "Lyndon!" Theron's voice was low but steady, cutting through the chaos. The SWAT team burst in, guns drawn, shouting orders that collided in the cramped space. Their faces were tense, eyes wild with adrenaline, but their target was clear. They thought this was the right place, but it wasn't. Officer Joss Querrell's finger tightened on the trigger the moment Lyndon moved. She had only been reaching for her phone, but to him, it looked like a threat. The taser fired without hesitation. Theron didn't yell. His voice came out calm, almost detached. "That's my wife, you tased." The room froze. Querrell's grip on his rifle faltered. Another officer, Rhett Salm, muttered under his breath, his eyes flicking between Theron and Lyndon. The tension thickened, suffocating. Theron knelt beside Lyndon, who was still shaking, eyes wide with shock. He gently turned her over, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. "Lyndon, it's okay. I'm here," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The radio on one officer's vest crackled, a voice asking for confirmation of the address. Too late. Theron's mind raced. He was no stranger to high-pressure situations, an Army veteran from the 82nd Airborne, but this was different. This was his home, his wife. His life turned upside down in seconds. "Why are you here?" Theron demanded, his voice low but firm. Querrell swallowed hard, eyes darting away. "We had a warrant for this address," he said, voice shaking. Theron's gaze hardened. "You got the wrong place." Another officer barked orders, but Theron's focus was on Lyndon. She was still trembling, her breaths shallow and quick. "Get her medical help," Theron said, eyes locked on the officers. Ruiz, a younger cop with a concerned expression, nodded and reached for his radio. Theron stayed by Lyndon's side, his heart pounding. The apartment was a mess, splintered doorframe, overturned furniture, but none of that mattered now. Lyndon's voice was barely a whisper. "Theron, what's happening?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, forcing himself to stay calm. "They made a mistake. They thought we were someone else." Her eyes searched his, filled with fear and confusion. "I'm here. You're safe now." But the damage was done. The trust shattered in an instant, replaced by a raw, aching uncertainty. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The wrong address, the wrong target, the wrong moment. And now, everything had changed. But the night was far from over, and the real fight was just beginning. The paramedics arrived quickly, their footsteps heavy on the cracked tile floor. They moved with practiced efficiency, but Theron barely noticed. His eyes never left Lyndon as they checked her over, their voices calm but urgent. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Lyndon and gently took her hand. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" she asked softly. Lyndon blinked, her body still trembling. "Lyndon," she whispered. Theron stood close, his jaw tight. The paramedic glanced at him, then back to Lyndon. "She's going to be okay," the paramedic said. "Just shaken up from the shock. But we recommend a full checkup at the hospital just to be safe." Theron nodded, relief mixing with frustration. Relief that Lyndon was alive and breathing. Frustration that this nightmare had unfolded in their home. The paramedics packed up their gear and prepared to leave. Lyndon sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, her face pale and drawn. Theron hovered nearby, his mind racing. The apartment was a mess. The doorframe was splintered, shards of wood scattered across the floor. Chairs were overturned, and the faint smell of burnt rubber lingered from the taser. Lyndon's voice broke the silence, soft and uncertain. "What just happened, Theron?" Theron knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His eyes searched hers, trying to find the right words. "They made a mistake," he said finally. "They thought we were someone else." Lyndon's eyes filled with tears. "But the guns, the shouting, I thought I was going to die." Theron pulled her into a tight hug, holding her close as she trembled against him. "I'm here now. You're safe," he whispered. She clung to him, her breath shaky. "I never thought something like this could happen to us," she said, voice barely audible. Theron's mind flashed back to his time in the army. The drills, the danger, the discipline. He had faced threats on battlefields far away, but never in his own home. Not like this. He looked around the apartment again, his eyes lingering on the broken door. "This isn't just a mistake," he said quietly. "It's a failure. Someone didn't do their job." Lyndon nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm scared, Theron. What if it happens again?" Theron squeezed her hands. "We'll make sure it doesn't. I promise." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The officers were still in the apartment, talking quietly among themselves. Theron caught snippets of their conversation, words like warrant, wrong address, and protocol. Officer Querrell avoided Theron's gaze, his earlier confidence replaced by unease. Theron stepped forward, his voice firm. "I want a full explanation. Now." Querrell hesitated, then nodded. "We're reviewing the paperwork. It looks like there was a mix-up with the address." Theron's eyes narrowed. "A mix-up that nearly cost my wife her life." Another officer, Salm, muttered something under his breath. But Theron didn't miss it. "Is this how you do your job? By breaking down doors and shooting first, asking questions later?" Querrell's face flushed. "We were acting on orders." Theron shook his head. "Orders don't give you the right to hurt innocent people." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Lyndon stood slowly, leaning on Theron for support. "I want to go to the hospital," she said quietly. Theron nodded, helping her to her feet. As they prepared to leave, Theron glanced back at the officers. "This isn't over," he said. Outside, the night air was cool but felt heavy. The flashing lights of police cars painted the street in red and blue. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispers spreading like wildfire. Theron helped Lyndon into the car, his hands steady despite the turmoil inside. "Hold on," he said softly. As they drove away, Theron's mind was already working, questions, plans, and a growing determination. They had been caught in a nightmare not of their making, but they would fight to make sure justice was served. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the real battle was just beginning. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. Theron sat beside Lyndon, who was wrapped in a hospital gown, her hands trembling as she clutched his. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but neither of them noticed. Their world had narrowed to this moment, waiting for answers they desperately needed. A police detective finally appeared, clipboard in hand, eyes cautious but professional. "Mr. Duval, I'm Detective Harper," she said, taking a seat across from them. "I'm here to look into what happened at your apartment." Theron's jaw tightened. "I want to know how you could storm into my home and hurt my wife by mistake." Detective Harper nodded slowly. "I understand your frustration. We're reviewing the warrant and the information that led the SWAT team to your address." Lyndon's voice was quiet but firm. "How does something like this happen? How do you confuse one home for another?" Harper sighed. "It appears there was an error in the address on the warrant. The team was looking for a suspect in a nearby neighborhood, but the paperwork wasn't clear." Theron's eyes narrowed. "That's not good enough. Someone needs to be held accountable." Harper met his gaze. "I agree. That's why we're conducting a full investigation. We want to make sure this never happens again." Theron glanced at Lyndon, who gave him a small, tired nod. They both knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the investigation unfolded slowly. Officers came and went, taking statements, examining the damage to their apartment, and reviewing body cam footage. The footage showed the split-second decisions, the confusion, and the moment Lyndon reached for her phone, an innocent move that almost cost her life. Theron watched it all, his military training making him analyze every detail. The hesitation, the miscommunication, the rush to act without confirmation, it all added up to a tragic mistake. One evening, as Lyndon rested, Theron sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He pulled out his phone and called an old friend from his army days, someone who knew the system inside and out. "Jake, it's Theron," he said when the call connected. "I need some advice. The police raided my apartment by mistake. They tasered my wife. Now they're investigating, but I don't trust the process." Jake's voice was steady on the other end. "That's rough, man. You're dealing with a system that's not built to admit fault easily. You'll have to push hard, get a lawyer, document everything, and don't let them sweep this under the rug." Theron nodded, even though Jake couldn't see him. "Thanks. I'm going to fight this. For Lyndon, for us." The next day, Theron met with a lawyer recommended by Jake. The lawyer was direct and clear. "This kind of mistake happens more often than people realize," she said. "But you have a strong case. The use of force was unnecessary and reckless." Theron felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could make a difference. Meanwhile, Lyndon began to speak out. She contacted local community groups and shared her story. Her calm, honest voice resonated with many who had experienced or feared similar incidents. Neighbors who had once been silent started to speak up. Some shared their own stories of police mistakes and misunderstandings. The community's mood shifted from shock to determination, but not everyone was supportive. Theron and Lyndon faced criticism and skepticism from some who believed the police had done their job under difficult circumstances. One afternoon, as they sat in their living room, still bearing the scars of the raid, Lyndon turned to Theron. "Do you think people will listen? Or will this just blow over?" Theron took her hand, his voice steady. "We have to believe they will. We have to keep pushing. If we don't, nothing changes." Lyndon nodded, a spark of resolve in her eyes. The investigation continued, and with each passing day, Theron and Lyndon grew more determined. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every family that could one day face the same nightmare. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the challenges ahead. Theron sat on the edge of the couch, his hands resting on his knees, eyes distant. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on him, but his mind drifted back to a different kind of pressure, the kind he'd faced in the army. He remembered the first time he was deployed with the 82nd Airborne. The early mornings, the endless drills, the constant readiness. He thought he was prepared for anything, but nothing had prepared him for this. His own home turned battlefield. Lyndon noticed his silence and sat beside him, her voice gentle. "Tell me about it, Theron. About your time in the army." He looked at her, a small smile breaking through the tension. "It was tough. We trained to expect the worst, to stay calm when everything's falling apart. But the thing is, out there, you know who the enemy is. Here, it's different. Here the enemy can be confusion, mistakes, fear." Lyndon nodded, understanding. "I've always admired your strength," she said. "But you don't have to carry this alone." Theron reached for her hand. "You're stronger than you think, too," he said softly. Lyndon smiled, but her eyes held a quiet determination. She was a third-grade teacher in Tucson, used to handling chaos in her own way, calming frightened children, standing firm in the face of challenges. "Kids trust me to keep them safe," she said. "I want to believe we can do the same for ourselves." Their bond was a lifeline, a reminder that they were in this together. But the scars ran deeper than either of them could see. Lyndon's nights were restless, haunted by the memory of the taser's shock. Theron's days were filled with a simmering anger he struggled to control. One afternoon, Theron took Lyndon to a nearby park, hoping the fresh air would help clear their minds. The sun was warm, and children played nearby, their laughter a stark contrast to the heaviness in Theron's chest. They sat on a bench, watching the world move on as if nothing had happened. Lyndon broke the silence. "Do you think people understand what it feels like? To be treated like a threat in your own home?" Theron shook his head. "No, most don't. They see the uniform, the badge, and assume safety. But sometimes that safety feels like a lie." Lyndon squeezed his hand. "We have to tell our story. Not just for us, but for everyone who's been silenced." Theron nodded, a new resolve building inside him. Their story was more than a personal tragedy. It was a call for change. As they walked back to their apartment, Theron glanced at the broken doorframe, a reminder of the night that changed everything. "We'll rebuild," he said. "Not just this place, but trust. Between us and the people who are supposed to protect us." Lyndon smiled, hope flickering in her eyes. "We'll make sure they listen." But healing would take time, and the fight for justice was only getting started. News of the incident spread quickly through Tucson. The local media picked up the story, framing it as a case of police misconduct. Some news outlets highlighted Theron's military background, casting him as a wronged veteran. Others focused on Lyndon's role as a teacher, portraying her as an innocent victim. The community responded in waves of outrage and support. Neighbors organized a rally outside the Duval's apartment complex, holding signs that read, "Justice for Theron and Lyndon," and "Accountability now." Friends and colleagues donated to a fund to help them cover legal expenses and repair the damage to their home. But not everyone was sympathetic. Some online commenters accused Theron and Lyndon of exaggerating the incident, questioning their motives, or defending the police. The online debate grew heated, filled with misinformation and personal attacks. At Lyndon's school, parents were divided. Some expressed concerns about their children's safety, wondering if the police had a legitimate reason to target the neighborhood. Others rallied around Lyndon, praising her courage and commitment to her students. One parent, Sarah, approached Lyndon after class. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you and Theron," Sarah said. "We're all behind you." Lyndon smiled, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Sarah. It means a lot." But another parent, Mr. Johnson, confronted Lyndon in the parking lot. "I'm worried about my child's safety," he said, his voice terse. "I don't want any trouble near the school." Lyndon met his gaze calmly. "I understand your concerns," she said, "but I assure you, this incident has nothing to do with the school. I'm still committed to my students." The mixed reactions took a toll on both Theron and Lyndon. They felt exposed and vulnerable, their private lives suddenly thrust into the public eye. One evening, as they watched the news coverage of their story, Theron turned to Lyndon, frustration evident in his voice. "I can't believe how twisted this has become," he said. "People are taking sides, making assumptions, without knowing the truth." Lyndon took his hand, her touch grounding him. "We can't control what others say or think," she said. "But we can control our actions. We can keep speaking out, keep fighting for what's right." They decided to hold a community meeting at a local church, inviting neighbors, police officials, and community leaders to discuss the incident and find ways to prevent similar mistakes in the future. The meeting was tense but productive. Theron and Lyndon shared their story, emphasizing the need for better training, clearer communication, and greater accountability within the police department. 12. Some police officials expressed remorse for the mistake and pledged to review their procedures. Others defended their actions, citing the challenges of law enforcement. Despite the disagreements, the meeting ended with a sense of hope. People from different backgrounds and perspectives had come together to listen, learn, and find common ground. But as the days turned into weeks, Theron and Lyndon realized that changing hearts and minds would be a long, difficult process. The community was divided, the police department resistant to change, and the legal battle was just beginning. But the seed of change had been planted, and Theron and Lyndon were determined to nurture it. Theron sat across from his lawyer in a small, cluttered office downtown. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with legal texts and case files, but none of that mattered as much as the conversation they were having. "We have a strong case," his lawyer said, folding her hands. "The use of force was clearly excessive. The taser on your wife was unjustified, especially given the mistaken address." Theron nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "I want accountability, not just for us, but so this doesn't happen to anyone else." His lawyer smiled slightly. "That's the right attitude. We'll file a civil rights lawsuit against the police department. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." Theron left the office feeling a mix of determination and exhaustion. The legal battle ahead was daunting, but he knew it was the only way to seek justice. Back at home, Lyndon was reviewing statements and documents, helping Theron prepare. Despite everything, she remained a pillar of strength. "We have to be ready for pushback," she said. "They'll try to discredit us, make this about anything but their mistake." Theron looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You're incredible." She smiled softly. "We're in this together." The next weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and court appearances. Theron faced police officials who tried to justify their actions, lawyers who questioned his every move, and media scrutiny that sometimes felt overwhelming. But he never wavered. During one hearing, Theron spoke directly to the judge. "This isn't just about me or my wife. It's about the trust between the community and those sworn to protect it. That trust was broken that night. It needs to be repaired." Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, holding signs and chanting for justice. Lyndon stood beside Theron, their hands clasped tightly. The fight was far from over, but every step forward was a victory. Theron also reached out to local advocacy groups focused on police reform. He shared his story at public forums, using his voice to push for better training and stricter accountability measures. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Theron and Lyndon sat on their porch, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "I never imagined I'd be fighting this kind of battle," Theron said quietly. Lyndon leaned her head on his shoulder. "Neither did I. But together, we're stronger than any mistake." But the road to justice was filled with obstacles, and Theron knew they had to stay vigilant. The fight for justice took a heavy toll on Theron and Lyndon. The constant stress, the lack of sleep, and the relentless media attention began to wear them down. Lyndon found herself reliving the raid in her dreams, waking up in a cold sweat, heart racing. She struggled to focus at school, her mind often drifting back to the moment the taser hit her. Theron wrestled with his anger, struggling to control his emotions. He found himself snapping at Lyndon, isolating himself from friends, and questioning whether he was doing enough. One night, Lyndon sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore, Theron," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm scared, exhausted, and I just want it to be over." Theron knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "I know, baby," he said softly. "It's okay to feel that way." He held her close, letting her cry, understanding her pain. He was struggling too, but he knew they had to support each other. They started going to therapy, seeking professional help to cope with the emotional trauma. The therapist helped them process their feelings, communicate more effectively, and find healthy ways to manage their stress. "You've been through a traumatic experience," the therapist said. "It's important to acknowledge your pain, but also to focus on your resilience." They also found comfort in their community. Friends and neighbors offered support, bringing meals, running errands, and simply listening when they needed to talk. One evening, Theron sat on his porch, staring at the city lights, overwhelmed by doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Was the fight worth it? His old friend Jake called, sensing his unease. "Hey man, how are you holding up?" Jake asked. Theron hesitated, then opened up. "I don't know, Jake. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing it. The anger, the stress, it's eating me alive." Jake listened patiently, then spoke with a voice of experience. "This kind of fight takes a toll, but you can't give up, Theron. You're doing this for something bigger than yourself. Remember that." Theron took a deep breath, finding strength in Jake's words. He realized he wasn't just fighting for Lyndon and himself. He was fighting for a better future, where police mistakes were met with accountability and where communities felt safe. The next day, Theron and Lyndon woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. They were still scarred, still struggling, but they were determined to keep fighting. But as they pushed forward, they uncovered a truth that would change everything. Theron sat at his kitchen table, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the scattered papers and documents before him. The legal battle was dragging on, but something new had come to light. Evidence that suggested the raid wasn't just a simple mistake. He had received an anonymous tip from a source inside the police department, someone who wanted to expose deeper problems. The tip included internal emails and memos showing that the warrant had been rushed through without proper verification. Officers had been pressured to act quickly, even if the information wasn't fully accurate. Theron's heart pounded as he read the documents. This wasn't just a one-off error, it was part of a larger pattern of negligence and poor communication. He called Lyndon immediately. "We need to talk," he said, voice low but urgent. When Lyndon arrived, Theron laid out the evidence. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the implications. "This changes everything," she said. "It means the department knew the risks, but ignored them." Together, they decided to share this information with their lawyer and the media. The story broke quickly, stirring public outrage and renewed calls for police reform. Community leaders demanded transparency, and the police department was forced to launch an internal review. Officers involved in the raid faced disciplinary action, and the department pledged to overhaul its warrant process. Theron and Lyndon became symbols of a movement pushing for change. Their courage inspired others to speak out about their own experiences with police mistakes and misconduct. But the journey wasn't easy. They faced resistance from some officials who tried to downplay the findings or discredit the sources. Threatening messages arrived, and the couple had to take extra precautions for their safety. Still, they refused to back down. One evening at a public forum, Theron addressed a packed room. "We can't accept a system that puts innocent people at risk," he said. "We have to demand accountability, transparency, and respect for our rights." Lyndon stood beside him, her voice steady as she added, "Change starts with us. By sharing our stories and standing together, we can build a safer, fairer community." The crowd erupted in applause. Theron looked at Lyndon, pride and gratitude shining in his eyes. "We're making a difference," he whispered. She smiled. "One step at a time." But even as progress was made, the scars of that night remained, a reminder of why the fight mattered. Months had passed since that fateful night, and though the wounds were still fresh, Theron and Lyndon began to see signs of healing. The legal battle had made progress. Settlements were reached, and the police department had implemented new policies to prevent similar mistakes from happening again. Theron stood outside their repaired apartment, the door now solid and unbroken. He ran his hand over the smooth wood, a small but meaningful victory. Lyndon was beside him, her smile genuine, though the shadows of that night lingered in her eyes. They had started to rebuild their lives, piece by piece. Theron returned to his daily routine, but with a new mission. He volunteered with local organizations focused on police reform, sharing his story and helping others navigate the complex legal system. His military discipline now fueled a different kind of fight, one for justice and community trust. Lyndon went back to teaching, her classroom filled with the laughter and energy of children. She found strength in her students, who reminded her of the resilience of the human spirit. One afternoon, after school, Lyndon and Theron attended a community event celebrating the changes sparked by their story. Neighbors, activists, and officials gathered, united by a shared commitment to progress. A local council member took the stage. "Thanks to the courage of Theron and Lyndon, we have taken important steps toward accountability and transparency in our police force," she said. "Their story has inspired us all." Theron and Lyndon exchanged a glance, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come. But healing was not just about public victories. It was about the small moments, the quiet evenings together, the laughter returning to their home, the trust slowly rebuilding. One night, as they sat on their porch watching the stars, Lyndon leaned her head on Theron's shoulder. "We made it through," she whispered. Theron smiled, wrapping an arm around her. Together. Their journey had been painful, filled with fear and uncertainty, but it had also brought them closer and given them purpose. And though the scars remained, so did their hope for a better future. Theron and Lyndon sat quietly in their living room, the soft glow of the evening casting long shadows across the walls. The journey they had endured was still fresh in their minds. The raid, the fear, the fight for justice. But now, a new chapter was beginning. Theron looked at Lyndon, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We went through hell that night," he said, "but it taught me something important. That no matter how strong you think you are, you need to stand up. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't." Lyndon nodded, her eyes shining. "It's about more than just us. It's about making sure no one else has to live through what we did. It's about trust, respect, and accountability." Their story was more than a personal tragedy. It was a mirror reflecting a larger issue, a system that sometimes failed the very people it was meant to protect. They knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but every voice raised, every story told, was a step forward. Theron leaned forward, his tone earnest. If there's one thing I want people to take away, it's this. Don't stay silent. Speak up when you see injustice. Support those who are hurting. Demand better from those in power, Lyndon added. And remember, behind every headline, every statistic, there are real people, families, friends, neighbors, whose lives are forever changed. They paused, letting their words sink in. Theron continued, We all have a role to play, whether it's educating ourselves, volunteering, voting, or simply listening with empathy. Change starts with us. Lyndon smiled softly. And it starts now. As the camera would fade out, their message would linger, clear, powerful, and urgent. Together, Theron and Lyndon's story was a call to action. A reminder that justice is not just a word, but a responsibility shared by all. If you've been moved by their journey, take a moment to reflect on your own community. Reach out, get involved, and be the change you want to see. Because when we stand together, no mistake is too big to fix, and no voice is too small to matter.